Hello. He speaks 5 languages. He's traveled through war zones. He's led several trips through North Korea, and he's been kidnapped twice. His podcast has over 7.3 million downloads a month, and he's one of America's leading radio personalities. And he's here for us tonight on the Addicted to Business couch. Today, he arguably faces his toughest challenge as Stokely Howard and I asked Jordan to reveal all on the Addicted to Business show. Have a listen and let us know what you think. Hello and welcome to another episode of Addicted to Business. Today it's my huge honour and absolute privilege to invite Mr. Jordan Harbinger to the show. Morning, Jordan. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, no episode of Addicted to Business would be complete without my good friend and co-host, Mr. Stokely Howard. Hello, Stokely.
Hi, Nath. Thanks for joining us, Jordan. Appreciate your time.
So for those who may not know Jordan, the intro says it all. One of the USA's biggest radio personalities and most successful podcast hosts. He's been an inspiration to so many around the world and one of the most humble gents in the game. Welcome, Jordan. So my first question, I appreciate we've got about half an hour of time today for our audience. And so before we dive into today's episode, I'm really keen to understand, to give our audience a little bit of a backstory. How did the journey begin for you, Jordan, right from when you're at college all the way through to where you are now?
Yeah, so I went to school like many kids did, and I was like, look, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but it doesn't really matter. In high school, I kind of coasted through, I didn't get bad grades, but I wasn't like, I need to get great grades so I can go to a great school. I just thought, like, I'll be fine, like most kids probably do. And then I went to a pretty decent college, but everybody there was smart. And so I decided that I wasn't going to be able to coast. It was real work. So then I had to outwork everyone, which wasn't hard because at uni, as you guys call it, all you have to do is limit your drinking to like 3 or 4 nights a week instead of 7 and you'll be fine. So it hits close to home, I can tell. And so I did that. And then in law school where look, before I get into law school, I was like, hey, I can't get a job. I just graduated with a 4-year degrry from the University of Michigan, which in the United States, like a 4-year degree from a Big Ten school should mean something. And I tried to go to I did go to Best Buy, which is like, I think you guys have JB Hi-Fi or whatever over there. Or like wherever you buy like Walkmans and CDs and computer parts.
Curry's PC World?
yeah, one of those. And I walk in there and I'm like, I just need a summer job, no big deal. And they're like, yeah, you can sell CDs and we're not hiring for anything else. And I was like, wait, what? And it was like my buddy's little brother who was 17, he worked in the CD department and he was going to like be my boss / mentor. And I was like, no way, man. I'm 24, 25. I have a 4-year degree. I have like $68,000 in debt. So it wasn't just ego. It was like also like, what are you talking about? $7 an hour. And I was like, this is horrifying. So I went to law school, which is another 3-year program in the United States. And I did that because I thought, okay, at least then I will be able to get a job as a lawyer, which guaranteed is not $7 an hour. So I went there. I had to outwork everyone there because everybody was really, really smart at Michigan Law, which is one of the better law schools in the United States, which I just lucked out getting into because I had a lot of international experience, and that's a lot of Americans don't have that. So they were looking for that. It was kind of rare. And then I got a job on Wall Street, which is one of the top law jobs, and I got that because I got good grades in law school. So I turned myself around. So I got my Wall Street job. I'm working really hard, but I never wanted to be a lawyer. Remember that from the beginning of the story, right? I never wanted to be a lawyer because I didn't know what I wanted to be. And then the economy tanks in the United States anyways in 2008. In 2008, they go, look, this is probably going to be over in 5 months, so we're just going to keep you on. No work, though. You don't have to show up. You can try and find another job. So I was like, great, let me just work on my startup, which is my podcast. It wasn't really a startup. It was just a podcast. It was like a hobby. I was like, I'll just focus on that for a while. I ended up getting a radio show out of the deal. I ended up generating a lot of coaching clients from the podcast. And then I ended up getting laid off from the law firm because the whole law firm went out of business. Because as you know, the economic downturn of 2008 didn't last 5 months. It lasted years. And companies that were really over leveraged got really bit by that. So I ended up leaving law entirely because it was kind of like you get one shot at this, if you're going to be a rapper, bro, go for it. Being a podcaster professionally, radio host, whatever, that was my SoundCloud rapper of, 2006. Give it a shot. This is your last chance. And it took off, and I was able to do well from that. And mostly I just didn't want to get another job as an attorney. And then that leads us to where we are now, 14 years later, almost like 1 month shy of 14 years of podcasting at this point, and one of the largest podcasts in the world. So I kind of got lucky in a lot of areas, like a lot of luck, right? The economy had a downturn, so I didn't focus on law, because if I'd been working a really busy law job, it would have been like, I can't keep this stupid podcast hobby going. I'm just going to quit. There's no money in this anyways. Bye. Right? But since the law gave out first, it was like, well, guess I'll focus on this thing that's making me $2,000 a month or whatever it was at the time, maybe not even quite that much. So that was where I put my efforts, and then that turned out to be a good bargain, a good payday.
Wow. Seems like you've had quite the career, mate. Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you a little bit more about your self-development program. If people are listening, then obviously Jordan will explain a little bit more about what this is now. Your work has been used with some of the globe's leading brands, including Google, Apple, Twitter, and the US military, I believe. So tell us a little bit more about this, Jordan.
So I originally started teaching social skills and dating skills and networking skills, and nobody cared about the networking skills because I was 27 or in my early 30s, when I first really got going with this, 27 up through my early 30s, I should say. And like guys and women for that matter, who are like age 27, 28, they're not like, let me figure out networking. They're like, that's for old people. I don't care about this. And I started to teach networking through the lens of dating, where I'd be like, here's the body language and here's the persuasion and this is how it works in dating. And people would be like, just teach the dating stuff. So I just taught the dating stuff for a while. And then as I got older, I started to get more corporate clients, military clients, and they're like, we want what you do for dating, but we want to make it like less dating-y, right? Because we're the Green Berets, or we're like MI6 or something. We don't need the dating thing. So I transformed the curriculum, and then I was like, hey, I'm married, or getting married, I don't really want to teach dating at all. I couldn't be less interested in it, but I do teach, spies, military, corporations. So I really focused on that curriculum. And then most recently, now I do a lot of keynote speaking, and I do very little training, and that's nice because training is tough and it requires you to put in like these really full days, and, you're working your butt off to get clients, and you're in a sales role, and you've got to close the deal and then do the logistics. And now that it's COVID, I'm like, I'm good on not doing any training. I'm good at being at home in my underwear doing a podcast.
Hopefully you're not in your underwear now, Jordan.
Yeah, well, you never know.
Let's build on that a little bit further, gents. I think building genuine rapport and probably deeper, more meaningful conversations has certainly been the catalyst to our growth. I'm intrigued to find out. I was having a read about you, Jordan, and Forbes have titled you as one of the 50 best relationship builders in the world. So I'm really keen to understand, do you have a kind of proven process or fixed model for successful relationship building? For those listening going, what is one of the 50 most great relationship builders? Like, what does that comprise?
Yeah. So first of all, don't believe any list you read on the internet. That's the first takeaway. But the second takeaway, though, is honestly, look, I do use a lot of systems for networking and relationship development. Every day, just as an example of a drill, every day I look at my phone, I scroll all the way to the bottom of my text messages, and that's where there's like these dead sort of interactions that you had 3-4 years ago with people that you don't even talk to anymore, you never talk to at all, and I'll reactivate 3 or 4 of those. And I call that Connect 4, which is actually a popular board game here in the United States. I don't even know if you have it overseas. Yeah, you do. Yeah. Okay, good. I always wondered if I could use that example and it made sense to people in other countries, and now I know the answer. So I call it Connect 4, and I do that every day. And then I also have a CRM that I use, which is like a client or customer resource management system. And that is essentially like a giant electronic Rolodex, like Salesforce, that kind of thing. And I will actually, did I get that acronym right? CRM stand for?
Yeah. Like
I believe so.
Or something like that.
Customer relationship management. Did I say resource? It's early here. And I put everybody in there that I talk to regularly, and I put certain reminders for follow-ups. And I use connectionfox.com, which is free right now if people want to go check it out. And you can put in like someone's name, when you last spoke with them, and then you say, look, I want in every 6 months to be able to touch base with this person. It'll remind you to touch base with that person in 6 months so you don't lose track. You don't have these sort of dormant network ties. But I also use things like nonverbal communication, body language, persuasion, influence, all these little elements. But the main, I'd say like the 80-20 of it is having systems in place to reach out to people, to make sure that you're making introductions that are helpful for those people. I have scripts and everything that I set up for that. And this is important because a lot of people will say, oh, I do a lot of this naturally, but you really don't. Most people think they do it because they talk with certain people regularly or they reach out to people often, but it doesn't really matter what you think you're doing. If you don't have a system, there's no way you're actually keeping your weak and dormant ties that activated. You're just reaching out to people based on whoever's on your mind at the time, and that's not really a good system.
Why the intros? Is it, again, well, I've always been taught the intros are more for reciprocity and trying to help others. Is that the kind of model you've used, or is there a different reason you make those useful introductions?
Yeah, so I want to build referral currency or social capital, right? So I want to be able to help other people as much as possible without the expectation of getting anything in return. Yeah. And the way that you do that in a way that's scalable is you introduce people to each other. Because if I want to help people, and let's say I'm a graphic designer, okay, now I want to help people. Oh, well, okay, let me design free graphics for people. Well, that takes a ton of time. And then also, what if they don't need graphics? Guess I can't help them ever? That's too bad. That leaves a lot of opportunity on the table. And then when I can help them, I spend 4 hours a day helping them. And I'm like, great, I got a free client, a pro bono client. I don't want that. So what I do is I introduce people to one another. So if I'm a graphic designer and I know somebody that needs a good intellectual property attorney, now I can help out any intellectual property attorney that's in my network and the person that needs that attorney. And it takes 30 seconds or a minute because I need to introduce them by email, having vetted both as good people. Right. So now I can make 100 of those a month if I want to, without making even so much as a dent in my calendar, my schedule, my diary. And I can also not do a ton of work on my own. I'm not sitting there painstakingly crafting graphics, and I can help anyone, right? It really opens it up. Think about it like going to a party. If I go to a party and I need an attorney, and I go and I'm talking to you and I go, hey, what do you do? And you're like, oh, I run a podcast and I've got a consultancy. And I go, oh, crap, I'm looking for an attorney. So now I'm looking over your shoulder. I want the conversation to end. Maybe I ask you if you know an attorney. You don't really know anyone. So I'm like, I have to go to the bathroom, and I cut the interaction short. Now I've got to do that like 100 times to find the one attorney at the party, if there even is one, right? So now I'm wasting all this time going through all those interactions for nothing because I'm looking at what's in it for me. But if I'm just looking at who I can help inside my own network, now I can go meet every single person at that party, or maybe I only have time to meet 4 or 5 people. But now I've got 4 or 5 new people that I can introduce to each other, to other people in my network, and I don't have to worry about what they can do for me. So I have much more of a target, right? If I'm trying to find a needle in a haystack, well, there's a reason that's the metaphor. But if I'm just trying to find any old needle in any old haystack, and the haystacks happen to have thousands of needles in them, my odds are greatly increased, right?
Yeah, great shout. Great shout.
Jordan, I want to know something a little more personal about you. We pride ourselves on asking the difficult questions on the show. What's been your biggest mistake, and subsequently, what have you learned from this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my biggest mistake, for sure, I initially had a bunch of business partners, and I worked with them, and they were okay for a few months, or even maybe like a year. I don't know. It's been like a long time since my first business. And then I realized like a lot of these guys were lazy as hell. A lot of them were not that smart. A couple of them were stealing. So I got rid of them and I reformed the business, and I brought 2 of my partners with me. But the reason I brought 2 of those partners with me was because I thought I needed them too. And then after a few years, they started to get lazy. They didn't improve their expertise at all. So I was doing like 50% or 60% of the work for the whole company. And I was getting like 1/3 of the revenue and the pay, or sorry, the equity in the pay. And then as I brought up these differences, it was just kind of like, well, too bad, we're partners. And I was like, am I really stuck with these guys? Like, I'm not married to them. I don't have kids with them. We kind of are married because we're in a legal entity together, and we kind of have a kid in that it's the business. So maybe I should stay in this partnership, right? So I stayed in that partnership for years and years and years. And eventually we just had a salty, acrimonious split. And so after 11 years, I split with these guys. I wasted a bunch of time working with them. And within 1 year of working on my own, after having to start over from virtually zero with only working with my wife and 3 of the people that worked with me on the podcast in the old business, because a lot of the team left with me, within 1 year, I had built a business that had that was more profitable than the one I left that I worked on for 11 years.
Amazing.
So had I left that business even earlier, well, it's hard to say, but I'd certainly have a lot more money. That's for sure.
So I guess the message is don't stick around if you don't have to, right?
Don't stick around if you don't have to. And also, honestly, like every year, evaluate what your partners do for the business. Is there anything you could do that can you replace them with automation? Can you even eliminate the element of the business that they work in? I'm not saying constantly be looking for ways to like screw over your business partners. It's great if you have good partners. You know, it's great to have people to shoulder the burden. It's great to have more minds working on problems. But if you've just got dead weight that's like leeching off of your hard work constantly, but maybe they do this one element of the business or these 2 elements of the business, and you're like, oh my God. So one of the reasons that I was able to rationalize staying in that old business was I went, you know, these guys, they teach a lot of the classes that I sell. So I generate revenue, but they service a lot of that revenue. Yeah. But then when I really started to do the math I could have done any time, mind you, I realized, okay, if I didn't have them to service these clients, I would either have to service those clients myself or stop selling that particular product. Okay, then that would lower my revenue by 2/3. Okay, but if I kept 1/3 of the revenue and then was able to focus all the company's resources on growing that 1/3 of the revenue to, you know, make up for the lost revenue, and I was able to get rid of 2 partners worth of equity that weren't doing anything but adding stress to my life, and I was able to get rid of that stress, and I was able to get rid of all the employees and the overhead associated with generating those 2/3 of the revenue, then I would have ended up with, let me do it real quick on my calculator here, a shitload more money, precisely 1 crap load more money than I had before, and way less stress, and a better team working with only the people that I like. And so when I finally was able to do that, I originally thought this is going to take 5 years for me to recover, and like I said, it took like 9 months.
I love that story.
Gosh.
In terms of the podcast, Jordan, I'm really intrigued to hear how you've gone from starting as a bit of a hobby to like 7.3 million downloads a month, Apple top 10. Like, it sounds pretty epic. You must have interviewed, and I've seen actually, looking at your site, you've interviewed some incredible people. Who's been your favorite guest and why?
Hard to say who the favorite is. Some of the favorites that I have are people that no one's ever heard of. Like episode 1 was Frank Abagnale. So if you've seen the movie Catch Me If You Can, he's the real guy who did all those imposter sort of things, and he has a lot of psychology that he used. And now he helps the FBI and companies get away from scams and like figure out how people are forging documents. So he was really interesting. That's episode 1 of the Jordan Harbinger show. But some of my other favorite guests are people you just never guess. Like I interviewed a guy who was a jewel thief who stole $18 million worth of diamonds, and we planned a fake heist, and he showed me like exactly how all this would work and how the getaways work and everything.
Oh, that's interesting.
I interviewed a mafia enforcer who was in on a plot to kill the Pope in like the 80s or the 70s or something like that. I don't even know. And also was in on like a lot of like mob hits and stuff like that. He's a really interesting guy. But I've also had a lot of entrepreneurs on. You know, I've recently had Charles Koch, who I don't know if he's famous outside the United States, but he's one of the wealthiest men in the world. And he's also heavily politically involved. He's 85 and still works really hard, learns a lot. He's kind of this very controversial figure in U.S. politics because he donates a lot of money to causes where you go, ugh, do we want to support that kind of thing? You know, like, so he's an interesting character, and his thinking is really good. But look, man, I've had Kobe Bryant on the show. Everybody brings
Ray Dalio. That's some names.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite, right? Because you work so hard on some of these shows, and then you realize that each episode has different takeaways. Like a jewel thief's not teaching us the same thing as Ray Dalio or Mark Cuban, right?
But then
generally,
I saw Billy McFarland from Fire Festival. Now that must have been an interesting show.
Yeah, so Billy McFarland from Firefest, if people haven't heard of Firefest, essentially it was this huge conference, a huge music festival that was supposed to take place on an island. turned out to be kind of a huge fraud. And there were no acts, that ended up coming, and they didn't have places for people to stay. And they made 2 documentaries about it, one on Hulu and one on Netflix. And so he got famous for all the wrong reasons. And I did that interview with Billy McFarland while he was in prison. He's still in prison. And after the interview, he was remanded to solitary confinement for breaking some of the prison rules, namely doing a media interview, I guess, without permission, which I don't even know if that's a rule. So I think his lawyers are fighting it. But, it's hard to have sympathy for somebody who's defrauded tons of people. But I do take issue with somebody getting thrown in solitary confinement for 90 days for doing a phone call with a journalist. Yeah, it's a little bit shady.
What was that, your phone call, was it?
Yeah, it was mine, yeah. He got thrown in solitary for doing the interview with me on the Jordan Harbinger show.
Oh, God.
So I felt a pang of guilt about that, but, what am I going to do?
Well, I'm sure he's done worse things.
I mean, Firefest, so.
Yeah. Another question I have for you, Jordan. I mean, there's so many to get through, and I'm aware that we're short of time. Sort of staying on the same subject, sort of slightly. If you're okay with me asking this question, I want to talk a little bit more about a horrific ordeal that was 2 kidnappings. Is that right?
Yes, they happened a long time ago, so I'm not feeling traumatized about it.
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah.
So what on earth happened there? Because it's such an interesting part of your life. I mean, I know our listeners would love to know.
Yeah, so actually, I told this story just the other day, and the episodes are not out yet on the Jordan Harbinger show, and it's like a 2-hour-long 2-part saga. So if people are really interested in this,
so go listen to that.
Go listen to that, and by the time this is out, at least part 1 should be out. So those are the kidnap episodes of the Jordan Harbinger show. But I'll give you the short version. When I was in Mexico in the year 2000, I got kidnapped by a fake taxi driver. And he drove me into this weird sort of ghetto area, and I knew at that point I had undeniable evidence of what was going on, right? He was being really shady. I'd asked him to take me to a really famous place. He said he didn't know how to get there, so it just didn't work. He thought he had an easy mark. But I was 20, and all I did was go to the gym twice a day and eat carne asada tacos and, drink protein shakes because I was 20 years old and in the prime physical fitness and had no friends in Mexico because I just moved there. So I was just working out all the time. And he was a probably 50-something-year-old cab driver who sat in a cab all day eating fast food. So when we fought in the cab, he lost that, and I ended up escaping from the taxi and getting driven back to a metro station by essentially another vehicle that I'd flagged down on the road. And I had to move as a result of that, because to this day, when I asked the guy to take me to the police, the car that picked me up, he was like, no way, don't get involved with the cops, too corrupt, potentially a kidnap gang that maybe has police connections. And also, how are you sure that you didn't kill the cab driver? And I'm like, good question, not sure about that, because I did put him to sleep in the car and leave him on the road, So it's possible he died. So I was like, oh my gosh. So I ended up fleeing Mexico for that. I assume the guy's fine because I'm not in any crime computers in Mexico. I've checked in the 20 years since then. And then the second time was 4 years later because I was working in Mexico, and I was working with the U.S. Department of Defense. Sorry, I was working in Serbia. Did I say Mexico again?
Well, I think I was working. Mexico is really not your place, right? But this one was in Serbia.
Serbia. Yeah, I think I said Mexico twice. Again, it's early. My coffee hasn't kicked in yet. So I was working in Serbia for the Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Defense. And it was a cultural exchange type scenario, but their security services did not believe that. And they sent some cops they're not real cops. They were like state security officers, but they were super high on meth. And they kept smoking and doing meth like during the ordeal and doing other drugs. And it was really early in the morning. They'd been up all night. And then they decided to feed us a bunch of alcohol, drink a lot of alcohol with us, but they were incapacitated almost, or at least they had trouble thinking. So I managed to convince them to leave the area where we were being held. And at that point, I was able to escape because they didn't have proper restraints on me. I was more or less clear-headed. They were not clear-headed. A friend of mine who was with me got severely beaten and attacked by them and injected with heroin during the ordeal. I carried him to a restaurant where we both got arrested again because we looked like junkies who were beat up and bleeding. And then the cops who came to get us heard our story and then immediately knew what had happened because we had seen the car, that had picked us up, and it was like the exact make, model, and what do you call it when a car has like running, certain types of running boards, certain type of paint job, certain type of license plate. We were able to describe it in such detail that they knew that me as if I was really just a tourist, I wouldn't have known what that vehicle looked like, so then they were like, oh crap, these guys got, kidnapped by state security officers and beaten up for no reason. So that ended up becoming kind of a miniature international incident. We ended up with a letter of apology from the foreign minister of Serbia, and I had to take care of that as well, because that was kind of a cluster, as you might imagine.
What a lot. A couple more questions, Jordan, as we look to wrap up today. I'm really interested to know, as your show continues to grow exponentially, where do you want to take it? What's the end game for the Jordan Harbinger show?
I like reading books and talking to smart people. Like that's really my thing. And whether it's talking with a comedian or an investor or a athlete or an author, I just like doing that. And now I've got a kid, he's 16 months old. So my idea now is to scale my business so that there are more people listening to the show. And the reason for that is it's the same amount of work for me to produce an episode, whether 300 people listen to it or whether 300,000 people listen to it. So the more people that listen to the show, the better. And then eventually when my kid is like 8, 10, 15, whatever it is, and he actually, probably not 15, when he wants me to hang out with him, he's old enough to care. I don't have to be nose to the grindstone 7 days a week doing it. I can put the hours in now. And also technology changes. What happens if podcasting becomes what if it happens to become hard to earn money? What if our $25, $30 CPMs turn into $3 CPMs? You just don't know. It is possible. So at that point, I kind of want to retire. I don't want to, have to go back to be a lawyer or like sell business coaching online. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but like that's not my bag. I don't want to compete in that space. So I want to scale now, make money now while I can, put my time in while I can, possibly retire at age 45, 50, whatever, and then just spend the rest of the time with my family. So I'm not trying to be like a billionaire. I'm not trying to make $100 million and pass down generational wealth to people that I don't even know and will never meet because they're my great grandkids or something. I don't care. They can get a job like everyone else. So I'm trying to make like a good, scalable business that doesn't require me to kill myself to run. That's really it, man.
Brilliant. I love that. So I think we're on the final two. What I want to know, if you could start over again right from the start, what would you do differently and why?
If I could start over again, I would... Good question. I would definitely not take on... Either I would not take on partners or I would have just left that partnership early. I don't think I could say not take on partners. When you're starting a business and you need people to do jobs that would normally pay $60,000 a year and you can pay them $12,000 a year, like you need to give people equity, right?
Yeah.
To live that way. As for what else would I do though? I would triple down on podcasting, right? Like now I know how to grow shows, go on other shows, create brands within shows. That I probably would have done more of. Instead, I focused on generating leads for our coaching business using the podcast. Yeah. And it just happened to grow because the content was good. I'm like, man, what if I'd been focusing marketing chops on growth this whole time? There really would have been something there. I don't really regret not doing that because we didn't have tools to measure attribution and all that other stuff. So it sort of happened the way that it needed to. But that would have been a pretty big boon for me. I think I got pretty lucky with podcasting. A lot of people I know started YouTube channels early on. Some of them are not making any money. They sort of peaked like 3 years ago. And I was really jealous of them 3 years ago. I was like, man, look at them now. 2 million subscribers, 5 years ago, whatever it was. And now I'm like, woof, they're selling courses on how to make videos because there's no money in CPMs. And their comedy that they were doing it fell out of favor, or the pranks they were doing are done by everybody. Like they can't make any money. So I really do think that podcasting really was like a lucky break for me in a lot of ways. So, but I would say working hard on my own, leaving partnerships when they no longer served me or the business I was running would have been a better way to do it.
And so, Jordan, final question for me is around anyone looking to start a podcast or go into radio or go into journalism. What tips would you give them to get started? So Stokely and I been running this podcast about a year now, looking to take it to the next level. What was the real catalyst for you to go stratospheric with your podcast?
For me, it was working really hard to get on other shows and get exposure for the Jordan Harbinger show. But also, you know, I do spend on advertising. I create marketing campaigns and things like that for the show that get more people listening. But the biggest driver of growth is always word of mouth. And the way you get word of mouth is you do really good content for people. And when you create and craft really good content, people want to share it. And I know that sounds like kind of naive. And also it's like, no, but where's the magic trick? You know, everything that movies people have told you are funny or really good, you go see them. Radio shows that you thought were really great when you were younger and still listen to them. You went and listened to them because your friends were talking about it. Television shows, same thing. You don't see an ad for Game of Thrones on the internet and go, oh, I'm going to check that out. You hear about it from all of your friends, right? You maybe see an ad on television, but mostly you hear about it from your friends. And so things like that are really the catalyst. And people share things that are really good and impact them. They don't share things that they've seen 1,000 ads for and share it blindly. You know, so you really have to craft good content. And even if you did have awesome marketing, but your content wasn't as good, it's like a bucket with holes in the bottom and you're trying to carry water in it. You just waste you have churn, right? You get people in and they go, this isn't that great. I don't really like this. You have to be able to retain people. So the first step is always to make sure the content is really good. And then people will share it. People will then come and stay. And then any marketing you do is just gasoline on the fire.
Love it. Jordan, it's been a huge honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it's really early out there in the States. And so thank you so much. Stokely, thank you as always for co-hosting with myself. I hope everyone that's listening has enjoyed it. If you'd like to find out more about Jordan, check him out, the Jordan Harbinger Show. Well worth a listen. And thank you, Jordan, and I hope to catch up again soon.
Thanks for having me on, guys.